We're going to welcome our first panel discussion today. And Trey Lamb in just a bit is going to be giving you some opening comments. Brian Farkas has joined us from West Virginia, and Nick Ivey has joined us from Mississippi. Kevin Burns from Texas is going to be joining in with us, and Steve Bednarz from Texas is also going to be joining us today. And we're going to take this panel discussion in this format. Trey's going to open it up with some opening comments in just a bit. We're going to have some panel presentations. Each of our 5 individuals can speak to the topic of beyond operation and maintenance, addressing the emerging issue of remedial and repair work. And then we're going to go to a white paper that's being developed by the National Watershed Coalition. Brian Farkas is going to take us through that. Some comments by panelists, and then to your questions that you're going to enter in the Q&A area of your Zoom dashboard. All right, Trey, for some opening comments, please get us started.
Well, thank you, Ray, and thank you, Dan and Lisa. One thing I will say that Dan Siebert's the only person I know that could be more popular in a virtual format than he is in person. So it's great to see so many people on here today. I welcome our panelists. Ray has done a quick rundown, and we'll have more introduction for them as they get to their part of our presentation. A little bit about what brought this group together. We're all from very active states. They're in the Watershed program and are really huge supporters of the program in general and have been for a long time. And it was NWC that brought us together through formal and informal conversations at NWC events. And we really came to understand that these states and local sponsors have very similar experiences working in the Watershed program. And we want to recognize that the Watershed program has been an outstanding success and provided decades of benefits. And the design and breadth of the program make it just as relevant today on a broad range of current conservation issues, not just flood control, but land management, water quality and quantity issues, and as Dan said, climate mitigation. But like all programs, like everything in life, like this meeting today, the program needs to evolve. And it needs to involve an area that include policy and key definitions that are part of that policy concerning long-term support for our watershed program and structures and for repair of those structures. With the years of experience in the watershed program, our states have come to recognize that some of the challenges and opportunities that we'd really like to address. So through our informal discussions at a lot of these meetings, our national meetings, and also at NACD meetings, Lisa and Dan asked us to come together as a working group and meet and really representing sponsors and state agencies. We hope to find common areas of policy and program implementation that are really of the highest importance, that are common across all areas and all states. So at this time, we'll start to work with our panel, and I'm going to call on Brian Farkas from West Virginia to outline a little bit of our white paper and how we work through that, and also to give us a West Virginia perspective. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Great, thank you, Trey, and thank you all for inviting us to be part of this today. I guess I should say a historic event because it's your first virtual. I'd like to repeat what Trey said. This has been a very successful program over the years, and now we're looking at 60+ years that these structures have been in place. They have provided flood protection. They have provided recreational opportunities, and they have also provided public drinking water supplies to many people who otherwise would not be able to have stable and secure sources of water. Having said that, I would like people to realize that the comments you're going to hear are not just are not an attack, okay? They are recognition of what we practitioners at the local level are facing every day in terms of trying to keep these structures operating as they were designed or as they were intended. The subject of small watershed dams I like to use this and say that, when I talk about these structures in West Virginia, and there are 170 of them, and that may seem small to a place like Oklahoma that has over 2,000, or Texas that, again, in that range. But all our 170 dams are high hazard dams. And so we take this very seriously in the sense that if, given our topography, they are in mountainous terrains. If they were to fail, the water would be running through a chute. And there are people who have moved in below these dams because of the protections that they are providing. As a matter of fact, we have over 40 dams, 38, I believe, that their hazard classifications have changed since they were built, just simply because of people who have moved in below them. And they went from significant hazard when they were built to now they're high hazard dams. And so as we look at the success of this program, I come back and I think of an onion. And while the onion is whole, as you start peeling back layers, you begin to start crying because of the issues that you are facing. And so the issues that we are facing in West Virginia are those issues, and you will hear more about it when our director of Watershed, Gene Sauburn, talks here in a little bit. But those issues, I think, are pretty representative of what you are what will be experienced all across the country. We have some of the oldest dams. Oldest dams were built as part of the original pilot project. We have some of the newest dams. We have a dam that was built in 2011, which surprisingly was not built because of flood protection. It was built for water supply. And we have the smallest impoundments from a ½ acre to some of the largest impoundments of 100 acres plus. We are earthen dams. We are roller compacted concrete dams. We have designed, we have rehabilitated 2 dams at quite an expensive rate. One was rehabilitated in excess of 10 million, another was rehabilitated in excess of 8 million. So we have run the gambit of this, but all along we are cognizant of the fact that our dams are getting older. And by the end of 2023, we will have, of the 170, we will have 170 of them that will have reached their evaluated life. And that is posing a problem and will pose greater problems in West Virginia, because when you take the aging of the dams, aging out of the current policies, with the fact that now after 50 plus years of being sponsored by local communities, you have local communities who aren't interested in sponsoring these anymore. They want to get out from under the burden. And if they do that, then who takes them over? So we are looking for a change. And as Lisa was talking about all this money that's now being available, and this new opportunity for watershed funding, this is perhaps the time that we need to come back, look at a program that was very successful in its onset. It built nearly 12,000 of these structures nationwide, but now we need to start shifting from building to maintaining. And we have to change our mindset that maintenance is 100% the responsibility of the local sponsor. The federal government helped build these structures. The federal government needs to help maintain these structures. And I'm not talking about cutting the grass. I'm talking about a variety of things that are going on with these structures, from risers that no longer function as they were designed, seeps that are coming through earthen embankments, spillways that are inadequate in size because of hazard classification changes, a whole host of things that need to be done on these structures. And that can't be left to the local sponsor. That has to be a federal, state, local responsibility. because again, these structures were built for flood protection, flood control, and it's a part of a national infrastructure. And as a result of that, it needs to have continued federal support beyond the rehabilitation. So, you know, with that, Trey, I think I've done my 5 minutes.
Well, Brian, we appreciate that, and we appreciate the perspective from West Virginia, and you've been a strong advocate for the Watershed program and expressed these views for a long time. But let's move a little further south to our friends down in Mississippi. Between the states that are represented here, we have over half of the flood control structures in the United States, and Mississippi has a very strong and active program. And today we have Nick Ivey, who's the executive director of the Mississippi State Soil and Water Conservation Commission. So Nick, give us a perspective of the issues that you're facing and how that kind of brought you to this working group to look for some changes.
Thank you, Trey, and thank you, Ray and Dan and Lisa. We appreciate all the work that is done with the National Watershed Coalition. We have learned so much from things that we've done through you guys, and we appreciate it. You know, in Mississippi, we have hundreds of PL 534 and 566 watershed dams. Most of them are reaching, you know, their like expected livelihood, but we certainly believe that we can, with somewhat minimal things to be addressed with them, that they can provide a lot more years of flood control within our state. A lot of the, like I said, a lot of the dams have exceeded their evaluated life in Mississippi. We do here at the commission, we do quite a bit of upgrading of dams, and like Brian was mentioning earlier, that's due to encroachment of building within those inundation zones. So the commission here is able to get some, we go to the state legislature and get some funding for federal match, but the money that we have available to do repairs and that kind of thing in the sponsors area is very minimal in Mississippi. The way our laws are written, the way the statutes are put together, they're the taxation has not gone up since it was started in the 50s. So we're collecting minimal money in the districts that are doing that. So we desperately need, are wanting to get with all of our partners and address this situation and see what we can do, because we believe that these can still provide a great benefit to us in the next coming years. We do hope that I'll just kind of echo what's been said before, but we hope that NRCS and working through our state NRCS office and our partners would look at repairs and remedial issues on these dams and prioritize and expedite those repairs to get these things working like they should be. I think Brian said it great, you know, that this was a successful program and it can be successful again, but right now it is a major problem in the state of Mississippi because sponsors just cannot maintain or make repairs with the allocated funds that they have. So we have some of the same issues. One of our biggest issues is going to be the fact that the soil that was used in those earthen dams was up to spec when we built them when the NRCS built them in the 50s and 60s, but it does not meet today's standards. And so there are some issues with some the soil that was used. We have a lot of issues with corrugated pipes failing, broken stems that need to be replaced and things like that. So we are just looking to address these issues in any way that we can here in the state, and appreciate this working group coming together to try to address those issues for the future. And with that, I will be quiet.
Thank you, Nick, and we appreciate that. And so you'll see that there's a common theme expressed, and there are also some common issues that I think people that have worked in the Watershed program and been sponsors for years. And some of those you heard Brian talk about maintenance. We talked about repairs. We talked about remedials. All of these and the different interpretation that people have of the meaning of those words definitely affects how you see the local sponsor, the state agency, or our NRCS partners can be involved in those. And that's part of what we came together as a group is as we affect policy, we also have to affect definition and the way that the policy is written. And so now we're going to turn to the state of Texas, one of our larger watershed programs, an extremely active program with a great deal of support, but also an incredible amount of work to be done. And first up will be Kevin Burns. He's a Wise County, Texas County Commissioner who works directly with these flood controls. And Kevin has been to Washington, D.C. many times to talk to not only his delegation, but the members of the Congress from all states to talk about the Watershed program. So Kevin, why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on in Texas, and also maybe how some of these issues have been there since the construction of these dams, and a little bit about the materials that were used. Kevin? Might have to unmute yourself, sir.
We'll check again with Kevin. Trey, I know that he was joining us by phone, and know that he was listening in there. So
sure, I've actually seen Kevin out on Facebook filling potholes at times himself. So he's one of those, like the rest of us, has to handle everything. So Steve, if you are ready, I know that you have some slides and a presentation in general about the Texas program, some valuable information there. And I know you all have been undertaking a lot of work at your agency in general. So Steve, I'll call on you at this time.
Thank you, Trey. My name is Steve Bednarz, and I'm the administrator for the Texas Soil and Water Conservation Board's flood control program. Our program assists the sponsors of these NRCS watershed program dams with maintenance, repair, upgrade, and rehab of high hazard dams. And so this is a big help to the sponsors. However, as we can see here in the next few slides, it's a really big challenge, and it's more than we can take care of with our own budget here. In Texas, NRCS built a little over 2,000 dams between 1948 and 2009. And of course, I think everybody probably understands the financing of those original dams. And sponsors are left after construction was completed with taking care of operation and maintenance, repair, or whatever the dam needs. The important thing here is the average annual benefits of the watershed projects in Texas are over 151 million, and that's just based on an update of to inflation of the original watershed plans. We know that with all of the urban development occurring in Texas, that number is probably much higher, because now we are protecting homes and businesses and highways downstream. As of 2021, this year, 2/3 of these dams, 1,382 dams, have exceeded the 50-year economic life.
Steve, let me jump in. Ray, your moderator, if you can move closer to your microphone, the folks are asking, just speak with your loud voice, and that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, my voice is usually pretty loud, but I'm evidently having some issues with that today. Is this better?
A little bit better, but use your bold, loud outdoor voice is all I can say. Right. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Back up the slides, one slide.
Yes, sir.
right, thank you.
Yeah, you're in control now. Yeah.
As of this year, we have 1,382 dams have exceeded their 50-year life. Of these dams, 135 need repair at an estimated cost of about $92 million. And of course, some of the dams that are still within their economic life also need repair. If you put all that together, we have a need to repair 162 dams in Texas at a cost of a little over $100 million. And of course, the main problem we have, it's always about the money. It's the financial problem. And NRCS apparently is unable to provide financial assistance on dams exceeding 50-year life. Some of the types of repair needed are slope slides. We have a lot of dams built in the Blackland Prairie of Texas, which is a high clay soil. And after 20 or 30 years, those soils become unstable if they are built on a too steep a slope and they haven't had any lime treatment for stabilization. We have 44 dams that need this type of repair. We also have issues with wave erosion on dams that probably should have had rock riprap wave berm on them to begin with. Over the years, this wave action on the dam has caused erosion. Principal spillway pipes are the other area that needs some repairs. We have quite a few corrugated metal pipes in dams. Some just tailpipes hooked onto a concrete pipe, and others with a corrugated metal pipe going all the way through the dam. And of course, if those pipes are more than 30 or 40 years old, they probably are corroded and need to be slip lined or replaced. We also have some issues with concrete pipes, and that's usually related to the outlet channel stability or instability, an eroding plunge basin, things like that, where the pipe support at the outlet is undermined. And here's another example of a plunge basin erosion. The photo at the top is about 1/3 of the plunge basin, so you can see it is pretty good size. And this is typically what happens is the plunge basin erodes and the outlet pipe becomes unstable and joints of concrete pipe start falling off into it. Some other types of repair are storm damage, auxiliary spillways. We have about 29 dams that need some repair there. We also have, occasionally, we have dams that get overtopped by large floods. And so this is another issue where we need to get in there and make some repair. We know these dams can provide benefits for hundreds of years. As long as they have flood storage available in them, they will provide flood control benefits. But of course, we have to take care of them. There's value in ensuring that the dams continue providing benefits. We had an engineering firm do an economic study on some of the repairs that were needed 2 years ago. At that time, we had 190 dams in Texas that needed repair. We assumed a 50-year amortization and looked at the cost of repair and the cost and the value of the benefits. And with that, we came up with an average benefit per dam per year of $77,000. And if you take that with the cost, we had a benefit cost ratio of almost 5-1. So we know there's value in taking care of these dams. The question again is about where does the funding come from? We have a program here at the state of about $8 million a year, which doesn't go very far when you have over 100 million of dam repairs needed. And of course, we're also providing funding for maintenance on 2,000 dams every year. And we're matching federal rehabilitation funds that come to Texas. So there's not much left for doing a strictly state-funded dam repair. So if there's some other sources of funding that we could find, it would really help us here. If there was a way we could figure out working with NRCS to get some federal money for these dams, whether they're past their economic life or not, that would also be a great benefit. So with that, I will stop and entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think we have Kevin Burns from our county commissioner from Texas who has an intimate knowledge of being a local sponsor. And Kevin, why don't you just from the local perspective in Texas, give it an idea of what you're dealing with and some of the issues you see with your flood controls and the expenses of taking care of those.
Well, the biggest thing about our dams is it provides a huge benefit to Wise County. As a commissioner, I take care of 340 miles of road in my district, and I have approximately 60 in my precinct and out of 108, and they provide great protection for the roads and catastrophic weather events, heavy rainfalls. You know, our biggest challenge is encroachment by development right now, because we're a high growth county. We're becoming a bedroom community for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's about an hour drive into city center of Fort Worth. So in the 70-minute to 75-minute into Dallas. So, because we're just northwest. So it's a very, I guess, sought after property in that area. Property values are going up, and right now our biggest challenge is keeping the developers out of the breach zone and out of the flood pool. There doesn't seem to me enough disclosure. We're kind of keeping that at bay. Texas does not have, they do not give ordinance making authority to commissioners' courts. So we have to do that through a floodplain manager. He is able to deny 911 address, and we are able to require a developer to do their own breach analysis or attach a breach analysis that's already been done by a grant or through NRCS or through state board, that if there's one already there, if there's one already out there, they can utilize that and then use all the available property downstream that they can that's outside the breach analysis. That seems to be our biggest challenge right now. Our funding is pretty good. We provide county funds toward repair of dams, toward maintenance. I have a dedicated crew of two guys that maintain flood control structures. Like I say, we have 108 of them. Have a supervisor that's on again, off again, but he's normally on with the two we have dedicated. He has other responsibilities. So I'm going to say I have 2.5 to 2 3/4 guys on any given day doing dam maintenance or doing dam some repairs or minor repairs. We're fortunate because we've been groomed. Most of the commissioners have been groomed by our local water control and improvement district. They're very, very active, have been for years. I've been a commissioner for almost 2 decades and been a member of the National Watershed Coalition for that period of time. Was taken under the wing by local WCID, asked to come to board meetings, asked to come to meetings, anything that the NRCS, USDA was involved in, anything Texas Association of Watershed sponsors were involved in, anything National Watershed coalition was involved in to get some training to help them maintain and these structures and possibly create some more. I would say I'm about 6 short in my precinct. I would love to build some more. Hope that's available to us. Been fortunate to get invitations through Dr. Siebert and through congressmen that we've met in DC. Been fortunate to get invitations up there and get to speak on our behalf, and basically got a satchel full of money to bring back to Texas. Thankfully, our Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board that Steve is with has a kind of an unwritten motto to not let any cost match federal dollars go unspent. And we've been fortunate to get some attention to some dams that needed it. And I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time. I'll try to get that back. If anyone has any questions, be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And so you can see that across the nation, we have somewhat different issues, but some very similar issues. And some of those are, we have components or issues from construction on that have raised their head maybe recently or in the past. Some of those are material based, some of those may be design based. And then also we have the question of how do we define these terms? And one of the ones we've heard recently is design life. You know, they continue to provide benefits for many years, and many of these dams will continue to provide benefits for another 50 years and perhaps 75 with just some minor repairs. There's also, in some cases like Kevin's, there's funding to take care of the smaller things, and that's the way it is in Oklahoma as well. We can keep up with what we would term maintenance, but how you define maintenance is different. Whether you're within RCS, whether you're with a local conservation district or a state agency. So as we came together, we tried to put a pencil to the things that we agree on and the things that we have questions about. And I think as a group, we might discuss this, and maybe the best way is to, rather than kick these around in a random order, Brian, is if we could have Ray bring up those kind of the points that we came up with, the ask or the recommendations of this working group that will be incorporated into a white paper. And then we can talk about those and how those affect the individual states, and perhaps that'll spark some questions as well. So Brian, why don't you walk us through some of the things that we recommended out of the working group?
Sure. First of all, a little history. We started talking about this pre-COVID. And so it shows that we have been talking about this for a couple of years. And we gathered in Oklahoma, 2019? And we kicked this around, and the people who were on this panel were part of that discussion in Oklahoma. And we decided that we came to the conclusion that if we continued to do what we were doing, all the success of this program would go to naught. You know, infrastructure would start to crumble because we weren't going to be able to maintain it. The flood protection that we worked so hard to try and generate, and you heard, like in Texas, it's over 100 million. In West Virginia, it's over 90 million. That would start to be rolled back. And so our national investment in infrastructure would be at a loss within 60, 65, 70 years because we just weren't maintaining it as it should be properly maintained. So we said, okay, so how do we go about trying to fix this? And this is what the genesis of the white paper is. And if it works, then I will be able to move my mouse as I was told. Okay, first of all, we said that this program is like a stream. It flows. It has to evolve, and so it's not static. You just don't build a dam It just doesn't sit there. Things happen. It interacts with its environment. And so this program needs to move forward and continue to grow. The big thing that we discussed in what Steve talked about in his slide was that we create artificial timelines. And I understand that there is a reason for them, but we have an artificial timeline of 50 years, can't exceed 100 years. And as you also heard Steve say, that these structures, properly maintained, can exist for centuries. And there was a point made one time that somebody went and visited China, and he was making the point that, you know, we talk about 50 years of evaluated life, yet I was standing on a dam in China that was 2,000 years old. And so these are, you know, pinning financial support to an artificial timeline just is not a realistic in today's world.
Brian, I think that's right. I think just because it was always done that way, or just because 50 years ago it was set into motion that way, we also developed these dams and turned them over to sponsors that had little or no financial ability to maintain them. And in many cases, conservation districts who may receive a small appropriation or stipend in some states from their state agency, or maybe have some taxing authorities, others like Oklahoma don't. We provide a small amount of money to conservation districts, but it's not anywhere that it would take in such as my home conservation district or county that has 145 dams in that one political area. There's no way. So it does roll back to the state, and in some ways rolls back to the partnership, because this was always designed to be a partnership.
Correct. And I always have said often that if I had the ability to create a Wayback Machine, I would go way back and sit at the table where these people were developing these programs and say, okay, now we can't do it this way because you don't want to put this public infrastructure on private property that is really controlled by private individuals. This is public infrastructure. It needs to be on public lands. You know, things like that. A mechanism going forward that maintains these forever, that keeps the federal government that was instrumental in their construction. They have to be there for the rest of these dams unless they're decommissioned. So, you know, we have the hundreds of dams that need repairs. And so we need to, and it's great to talk about rehabilitation because you're getting, you know, it's like you're taking a 1955 Cadillac, putting it in the shop and you're restoring it and you're bringing it right back. And it's, you know, a car with it's a 55 on the outside, but it's got disc brakes and a new motor, a drivetrain, and you've got it. That's what a rehab is to me. But, you know, we could keep that 55 Cadillac on the road if we just, you know, change the brake shoes or fix the exhaust system or did something like that, that would buy down the risk of failure of that vehicle, but it would continue to operate. And that's the mindset that we need to start developing, is that, you know, rehab is great, but, you know, and it has a place, but keep rehab, you know, keep rehab for those structures that really deserve to be, that really need to be rehabbed. And let's repair everything else, because that is more cost effective. We can do a lot more. You know, for the $18 million we spent in West Virginia rehabbing 2 dams, that $18 million could have gone a long way toward repairing a lot of the structures that we are facing every day that need to have works, from seeps and risers and tow drains, and, you know, you name it, we've got it. The other aspect of this, you know, the benefit here is longevity. You know, we want to be able to show that spending a little bit of money, changing the focus to spend money on repairs is going to pay big dividends in the long run. You know, as Steve was talking about their cost benefit ratio. You know, I wish I had something like that in West Virginia that I could just go ahead and do that, but I imagine ours would be pretty similar. You know, repairing something is going to generate the big bang. It's the leaving it alone that creates the need to rehab. But if you're repairing it along the way, you're saving yourself money in the long term.
Brian, and two, if we look at the relatively small amount of money it will take to repair some of these dams versus a rehab or a new construction, as you get into these new construction projects, they are so expensive mitigation that it's really hard to justify them. So if we could spend a little bit of money and maintain another 50 years of life out of these dams versus trying to allowing them to fail and then go back and build a whole new dam, I think that's really when the return on the investment becomes even greater, because sometimes I think we look at it in old dollars rather than current dollars.
I would agree. So we boiled this all down into a series of recommendations. And the first one is, I'm not going to read this for you. You can see it. And as Trey said, this will be available later on for it's being recorded. But, we are, Steve talked about some of the design issues. Trey's talked about the design issues. Nick's talked about the design issues. Construction flaws, fill material, these are all common things that are occurring. And it's at no fault of the people who constructed them. It's just that, this is what it is, and this is what we're dealing with today. So we need the recommendation. Number one is let's take care of that. And then number two is, we should look at these repair and remedial issues a lot closer. And we need to expedite this work.
And we need the local people, the stakeholders, the sponsors, the state agencies involved in that decision-making policy at the national and the state level. Because, the entire conservation system was designed based on that partnership and with the local priorities being set. So even in a national program, you need that stakeholder input, and you need, if we're going to partner on the delivery of this benefit, then we need to partner on the setting the agenda and the policy and the future of this program.
Good point. It's often said that the conservation is led on the basis of locally led. The whole movement is locally led. So, let the locals lead with the help. Okay. And then our recommendation number three, dedicate a portion to addressing remedial and repairs. Let's not just all lump it into rehab. Four, you can see again, it's working with NRCS in order to make some of these more definitions, changing language in the current policy. And then five, again, this just comes back to what Trey said and what Steve said and what Nick said, is that, it's if we can develop the mindset of repair and not look at repair as maintenance, which is, the downfall, because it's looking at it to say, well, this falls under maintenance and you're responsible for operation and maintenance. Well, repair, we need to get defined better definitions for the terms that we're using so everybody understands. To me, maintenance is, I'm going to cut the grass and I'm going to remove the debris from the riser. It's not, I'm not going to, to me, it's not, I'm replacing the tow drains because they were made out of a material that over the course of decades has rusted away. And then funding that at the state level to allow local partners to participate. And what I'm really saying here is that this comes back to, I believe, getting that more local involvement in here. And as we are developing a project, and I personally, and it's I like the idea that NRCS should change its funding formula and how this money is allocated to states, and that it should be allocated perhaps on a block grant system. That states then are given the resources to use with local sponsors to then address those repairs that are needed, that are of an emergency nature based on the state's needs and what state regulatory agencies are telling them that need to be repaired, which oftentimes is a little different than what the NRCS is telling us. So, and I think that was 6. Yes, that was 6. So Trey, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so are there any of our other panelists who would like to comment on the recommendations that we made or how we arrived at them? And then after we get through the panelist comments, we'll open it up to questions from our audience. Ray, do we have any questions that have come in? Or
we sure do. And again, just a reminder to folks, use your Q&A or your questions and answer area on your Zoom dashboard to enter those questions. I noticed that Dan Siebert had been answering some of them along the way too, but I'm going to make just one announcement, if I might, Trey, first. Andrew brought us a piece of information. Get out your piece of paper and pencil and write this down. The National Inventory of Dams is planning to launch a new website he made mention of, and it will include the inundation maps of USACE dams. And in a webinar on this topic, they mentioned that there will be a possibility of attaching the inundation maps for dams that are owned by different organizations for the public to view. And don't know if this would help, he says, with the development, but just want to make that note that if you've got another reference, that's always good, right? So let's look at, yeah, great resource. And thanks for sending those resources in. So let's tackle one of these at a time. And I'm going to roll down here maybe to Nick because he is on the panel. Nick said in Mississippi, we recently accessed a particular dam for upgrade, with one of the options being to decommission the dam. Cost to decommission the dam was about 75% of the cost to upgrade it. This is an answer to a question that came in. So I would say that in many instances, decommissioning is not a good option dollar-wise. And I believe you're responding, weren't you, Nick, to this anonymous attendee question, which for dams that have exceeded their life expectancy, and sponsors that don't engage in annual operation and maintenance, what would be the cost to remove those structures? So Nick, why don't you expand on that a bit? You had a specific answer to that question.
Well, yeah, I just, we recently were looking at a dam that is, was on the list for a high hazard upgrade. And obviously when you do those assessments, you look at 3 or 4 different options. One of the options being decommissioning the dam. And at least on that dam, I was very surprised, but this may be pretty normal, but that the cost, the cost of decommissioning the dam, because of so much upstream and downstream that has to be done in those situations to secure that area, the cost of just decommissioning it was about 75% of the cost of the upgrade. So it just didn't make sense to look at that as an option, because it is providing, even though it is providing a benefit there as it is. And I was just really surprised at that, the cost of it. But when you look at, like I said, when you look at the protection that's required to decommission the dam upstream and downstream, it gets that stream bank and shoreline protection gets really expensive with it. So I just thought I'd throw that into the anonymous.
Yes. Nick, I'd even say maybe you don't relieve yourself of the liability or the maintenance even after you decommission one, because there may be ongoing issues with that decommissioning that you didn't anticipate, or continuing, issues that it raises with adjacent landowners, or things that you didn't know were going to happen, that you're going to be required to go back in and work on in the future. And certainly I don't know that the legal community is going to resolve you of any liability just because you've decommissioned it.
That's correct. And I know in the state of Mississippi, there's another process to go through with the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality on their dam list that's above and beyond what it would take to just federally, what the NRCS would require to decommission it. So, and we didn't even look at that cost because the other was so high. But just one thing to keep in mind when looking at decommissioning.
Well, thanks so much. And let's go to the next question then, Trey. What are the anticipated yearly funds for needed to take care of a dam? And I got to imagine that's a really open-ended question depending on the structure and all of the things needed, et cetera. But if one of you panelists want to take that on, anticipated yearly funds needed to take care of the dams.
I've never actually put, a pencil to exactly what it would be because every dam seems to be unique. It's kind of like Brian talked about a car or a piece of machinery. You never know in especially something that's 25 to 50 or more years old, what's going to be the next part that breaks down. It depends on whether you have a flat tire or you have an engine go out. So in some cases, we have about $4 million in backlog of what we would can call just maintenance yearly in Oklahoma. That number continues to grow even though we're spending a lot of money, and that doesn't count the corrugated metal pipes that we're going to talk about later, the actual replacement of components. So just to maintain them, would be in the millions, low millions, but to actually go in and repair them to where they need to be, I'm not exactly sure what you would put a figure on an average dam because they all are unique.
In West Virginia, we have 170 structures, and we in 2020 we spent in excess of $1 million just to cut the grass and remove the debris, just your general upkeep, house cleaning kind of items. This year, 21, we are in excess of $750,000, I think, and we're not completely done. And like Trey, those dollar amounts do not even begin to talk about the issues of repair. Again, the risers, the tow drains, removing sediment below, dealing with any of those other items. This is just essentially cutting the grass and removing debris, and that's costing about $1 million, and some sediment removal downstream in the distilling basin plunge pool. But other than that, these structures are fairly expensive. We have noticed over the course of the years that as the local sponsors who in many cases were the least able to maintain were given the responsibility for them at the beginning. As the years have gone on, those costs have shifted to the state. So now about 30% of the annual cost is paid for by the local sponsors, and the rest is paid by the state, and that's pretty much growing. Just this year, we had a local sponsor say, "Well, do I really have to continue doing this because we just don't want to anymore?"
Well, thanks for the panel responses there. Very good. And I noticed Dan Siebert's been answering some of the questions that are coming in. Reminder to our participants, just keep on those questions and answers. We'll get to as many as we can. And the next one seems, Trey, to be very important to the panel. Has the Emergency Watershed Protection Program been used or looked at into for repair of dams which were damaged from flooding or other natural disasters? These funds have been utilized for repair of high hazard dams in Indiana as an example. So do you have examples, panelists, of the EWP program, Emergency Watershed Protection Program, being used for repair of dams damaged by flooding or other natural disasters?
This is Steve.
Go ahead, Steve.
Can y'all hear me better now? I made some adjustments.
Yeah. Oh, big
Thanks,
thumbs up, Steve. Thank you.
All right. In Texas, we've used a lot of EWP money, and in the past, and in the way it worked here after the state board started their flood control program in 2010 is again, we use state funding to match those federal EWP funds, just like we're doing on the rehab program. And so that helped the sponsors out a lot. And there would probably be some of those really expensive repairs that were needed after a big storm and a big flood that the sponsors would not be able to handle even their 25% share of that with a federal EWP project. And so it was beneficial in that regard for our program to help the sponsors do that. Now, the problem going forward is, I believe NRCS, I'm not sure that they can provide financial assistance of any kind on dams that are over 50 years of age at this point. And so that's a concern, because we know the next time a hurricane comes in off the coast of Texas and damages 50 or 100 dams, we're going to have to figure out a way to take care of a lot of that without federal assistance, probably. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember some comments from NRCS about whether they could provide EWP funding on dams that were over 50 years of age. So it is a good program, and the question is, can NRCS continue to do that on these dams that have exceeded 50 years of life?
And I think that is a great question, Steve. And also there's the question, we've utilized EWP in Oklahoma really well and worked very well with our state conservationist and engineer. But there's also the question of maintenance. And so if some point in a trip or an inspection of a dam, there was no noted maintenance, it's possible that they would not qualify under EWP because proper maintenance wasn't performed at the original time. And so there are those little caveats and those little definitions and those little policy quirks that can make it not necessarily an option to use EWP. Also, we would love to suggest you use that EWP model to do the repairs that we're talking about versus the rehab and the planning and the long-term engineering. That's such a big part of the rehab program that increases the cost so greatly, but also increases the timeline, which puts these projects back several years from the time that they're first identified. So the EWP model makes major $1 million repairs relatively quickly within a short amount of time. And we would suggest that would be a good blueprint for this repair program that we're requesting.
Thanks,
I
panelists.
agree. I think that's a good program to use if we can follow that model. It's worked real well in Texas.
Thanks, panelists. Excellent coverage of that question. Let me ask a even more specific question that came from anonymous attendee. Will legislative action be needed to amend the existing statutes and authorizations in order to implement the 6 recommendations that Brian was able to go over with us? So let's start with maybe Brian and Trey on this one.
I think that ultimately you're going to have to get Congress involved in it. These were created by public law. I imagine you're going to have to update it through a creation and then policy development after that.
And we do have kicked this around in our National Watershed Coalition meetings and in our working group. And there are those of us that believe that there is the flexibility within NRCS policy, and that coming down from headquarters with influence from the states and stakeholders, that we could actually change the policy. There are kind of 2 ways to do it: to allow NRCS to update and modify their policy, or to go through the legislative side. And one way, I think there are those of us that would prefer to have it come from NRCS, because they are the one delivering the program and understand the program. Sometimes when Congress gets involved, they may put language in there that's actually more restricting and take a while to work through to deliver their intent. And that's always the intent. So I think there's a possibility that some of the programs, similar to what we're going to talk about in Oklahoma with our pilot project, that there is some flexibility to work on some of these issues.
I see Dan is actually working on the fund amount from Congress needed on a yearly appropriation needs for 11,500 dams. So we'll let Dan answer that. Hey, Dan, do you want to weigh in on that while you're typing the answer? We may have him.
Well,
do-
I can't talk and type at the same time, so I'll just talk.
Okay.
My good friend Jesse asked that question, and I guess it depends on what type of needs you're talking about for the 11,500 dams, or 11,807, I think. But the point being, some of this that this working group has talked about requires some inventory and assessment, and immediately the light bulb went on for some NRCS people there, because those are defined words that they use in their conversation, but I'm not using them as they're defined. What I'm saying is, folks have to go to the field. They have to see the condition of the structures in the field, and then they have to jointly determine what category what they see falls into. Because one man's repair might be another man's O&M or another woman's O&M, and in actuality, there's some terminology that has to be agreed upon, and then it will require going and looking and noting what's actually on the ground out there. So it's at this point, it's very difficult to say a dollar figure that it will cost, or what's an average individual dam cost. There's some data that's being gathered in a presentation you'll see here shortly that will contribute to that body of knowledge, but it really does depend on agreeing on some definitions and then actually laying eyes and investigating what's out there in the countryside.
And I think that's what Brian mentioned about setting priorities at that state level, is allowing those, the state and the state agency, the local sponsors in RCS to go out and look at those, and then, get a general agreement on what the problems are and what repairs are needed, and then prioritize what classification or what type of repairs are the most important to sustain the dams, maintain integrity, and then also extend those benefits going forward. And I think that's best a decision that's made at the state and local level.
So we've got a little bit, I want to make note that Kevin Farmer is with us today. And we'd like Kevin, if he wants to comment on the emergency watershed program use, if that's all right with the panelists, I'll move Kevin over
great.
And let him speak to that. Hang on one second. Let's move him over. Going to make him a panelist too, so that you can see. All right. So Kevin, let's see if we can get you unmuted there.
That work, Ray?
Yeah, you're with us. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, hey, thanks. Perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks panelists for the presentation. Some excellent information. I do remember a few years ago this came up, and looks like a lot has been done since then. I did want to provide one point of clarity on the EWP portion, and that is if a structure is past its service life, that really doesn't play into EWP at all. So that 50-year service life issue that we were talking about really only applies to the remedial program for watershed operations. So you're able to, after the 50 years, to still use the rehab program as well as the EWP program, or to do a new project through ops. So EWP should be used immediately. So if someone has restricted you guys there from using EWP, we want to help to alleviate that and provide some assistance. So we do want you to continue to use EWP. That actually came to mind when I saw the presentation. I was like, man, that's a good EWP project. So we do want to help you there as much as possible.
Kevin, thanks for weighing in on that. Back to the panel discussion then. And just a reminder to our participants, if you do have a question for our group, put it in the question and answer area of the Zoom dashboard. That allows even our panelists to answer the questions that come in, and all to be able to see that. And Dan Siebert also is answering some questions. So, but one came in that I do want to pose to the panel, Trey, if I might. It says the panelists indicate that the dollars to repair these structures can or should come from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. I'm curious about whether the rehabilitation estimates cited in the examples account for the NRCS mandated process, including the assessment, rehabilitation, planning, design, and construction. So one of our panelists might want to tear off on that one question, and I can repeat it if you need.
Well, I mean, I bet Steve would probably be the best to answer that, but I will say that there is a hidden cost there, or that NRCS absorbs up front, on the planning and that part of it. And then the actual construction cost comes to be shared by the state. And those costs have escalated. We estimated in 2007, most of our dams that we rehabbed were estimated by $750,000 for the rehab, the construction part. And now they're running $3 million to $10 million for rehabilitation. And I would only expect that to continue to escalate very quickly. So, and the back end costs that NRCS has, I know is very high too. And we would really put in a plug for more staff on that planning and engineering staff. We had an incredible amount of staff just in Oklahoma alone and Texas when these dams were built. And if we're going to maintain, rehabilitate, do the remedial repairs, that's critical that they have that staffing to get that done. And I don't think that the outside contracting of that is a cost-effective way to do it or the proper way to do it. Just my personal. But Steve, you might talk a little bit about the other cost involved.
Well, it is expensive to develop a rehab plan and prepare a design. Of course, that's the activities you have to do before you can go to construction. And of course, the rehab planning is, the purpose of that is to determine if the project is still feasible economically as well as environmentally. And so you might go through that process and determine that it's not feasible.
Yeah.
That's a possible outcome as well. And maybe the best alternative is to decommission the dam. We haven't done that in Texas yet, but there is some consideration of doing that on at least one dam that we're currently working on. So, and it's been considered in the past as well. And so, I'm sorry, my phone's keeps ringing. I forgot to unplug that, but the cost has dramatically gone up. We did, like you said, some rehab projects early on in early 2000s that were $500,000, $1 million. And now we've got several right now that are running right at 10 or 11 million. And a lot of it's because of the requirement for a concrete spillway. The ones that don't require a concrete spillway, they're more in the range of 4 to 5 million. So again, dramatically increased cost just in the last few years. And so, but the other thing to consider here and keep in mind, we're talking about rehab on dams that are high hazard, which means if they fail, then there's potential loss of life and extensive property damage. That's not likely to happen unless you get a really big storm that overtops the dam or breaches the spillway. And with that in mind, if you think of a dam that needs repair, regardless of whether it's a low hazard or a high hazard, if that dam needs repair, there's something wrong with it. It has a higher risk of failure just because it needs to be repaired. And from that standpoint, on our program here, we give priority to number one, matching any federal money that comes, whether it's EWP or rehabilitation, and number two, doing the dam repairs. We also have the third priority of actually paying for a state-funded rehabilitation, or what we call a high hazard dam upgrade, in order to distinguish it from the federal rehab program. So we're doing a few of those in Texas this year as well, but we give priority, a higher priority to dam repair, because there is a problem with that dam that needs to be addressed. And that's why we do that.
Thank you, Steve. And we have probably time, Trey, for two more. I've got two more sitting right here for the panel. Two more questions. Here, this one comes from Connecticut, and kind of an example that they wanted to have addressed by the panel. because of extensive upstream and downstream developments and change in hazard classification. They had a rehab situation in Connecticut. The biggest concern is the loss of life. Steve just mentioned this, right? Due to potential breach. During the PMP and PMF, the commission was determined to be the best option. The best option. Does the panel have any comments on that when decommissioning becomes the best option because of the hazards or the loss of life due potential?
I can comment on that a little bit. It's the one thing you have to consider is if you decommission the dam, what happens downstream after that?
Mm-hmm.
And what is downstream now that's going to be impacted by increased flooding because the dam is no longer there. And so removing a dam building new dams is not easy these days. It's very difficult, but removing a dam is not easy either. And so all of that has to be taken into account if you develop a plan to remove a dam. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense in some cases if the dam has very low benefits and very high repair cost, or if it's has very low benefits and the rehabilitation or upgrade cost is most of the time is pretty high as well. And so I think there's going to be some cases where it makes sense to decommission, but you got to consider a lot of factors when you do that. And to say you're going to remove the dam and then go away, there's going to be a site there that's got some kind of erosion control structure because of the sedimentation that's occurred over 50 years and that sort of thing, that you're going to have to address maintaining that site even after you decommission the dam for quite a good period of time.
Well, thanks.
The part that's in the sediment pool or the sediment area can be a difficult management challenge. We've seen some of that. And most of these dams work in a system, at least in Oklahoma. And so, yes, you may decommission and protect those homes that are right down by things you do to the channel or reinforcement, that kind of thing, erosion control. But that stream downstream is going to be more subject to flooding, directly even out of that breach inundation. And with the increased, climate extremes that we have, anything that we have that can reduce flooding should either be maintained or continued on. Now, sometimes it's not feasible. We have decommissioned dams in Oklahoma and currently have a very rural one that has structural integrity problems that just can't be fixed. It's not high hazard or anything, but though it does happen, and sometimes it's appropriate to do that. But I would say that's kind of the last resort.
Well, thanks, panelists, for that. And we did have one comment come in regarding the NRCS still understaffed to review and oversee the work and major project delays resulting dramatically affected by the material shortages now. And I know that the National Watershed Coalition has been actively involved in at least trying to get that relieved too, through influence and the abilities to be able to do some of that too. And with that then, Trey, maybe just one more wrap around our panelists, because you always get to that point where, dang, I wish I would have said that. I was a part of a major panel today and I forgot to say that. So let's wrap back around, Trey, to our panelists, see if they got any forgotten things they want to speak to.
Sure. Nick, why don't we start with you? Is there anything final comment you'd like to have?
Well, there was one comment I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the EWP program and with dam rehab as that relates to it. But I guess this is just a common sense way of thinking things. But we had a situation earlier this year in Mississippi where we had a emergency spillway blowout. We had 26 inches of rain in an 11-hour period. Nothing. None of our structures are designed to put up with that. But my point is that we had EWP money that's going to be able to repair that. That dam needs to be upgraded as well. And it is frustrating for me as the problems that we have to see. I wish there was some way to logistically to figure out how, and I think prioritizing the dam, the needs would help, but I would love to see that $1 million go into upgrading that dam and fixing the emergency spillway at the same time to fix the problem long-term, rather than just a quick Band-Aid where we're going to end up tearing that out in a year or two when we get time to do it and get the money available and upgrade that dam. So I just was going to mention that. I know Kevin's listening, and one of the things that it's frustrating to me, and it's just that kind of a big picture thing. Let's look at how we operate in general and use our money the best way we can to fix these issues rather than some Band-Aids. We love the EWP program, and but I know in those situations it's tough to see work being done that will be undone soon. Appreciate all the panelists, and I know I've learned a lot today just listening to the comments.
Thank you, Nick. Kevin Burns from Texas, do you have any final comments for us? Kevin's probably working. Steve,
Yeah.
you can, oh, there he is. Okay.
Yeah, if I can get off mute, excuse my lack of technology.
Yeah,
Um,
same way.
I would like to just encourage everyone, and let me use a dead president's quote: "Do what you can, where you can, with what you have." And because we have an opportunity to protect people from flooding, life safety, and property damage from your area all the way to the termination of the water, whether it be the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, or Gulf of Mexico in my area. And I'm affecting people's lives with what I do more than 200 miles away. So I want to leave with that word of encouragement to just keep the program alive, because it is viable, it's necessary, it has saved lives, and it continues to save money.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Steve, what any further comments from you?
Yes, I'd like to just make a couple of points. In Texas, NRCS built over 1,000 dams in a 10-year period from the mid-50s to the mid-60s. Now, that just boggles my mind that could get done. Obviously, we don't build dams like that anymore. NRCS doesn't. I don't believe any state or federal agency will ever build dams like that again. Building new dams is difficult, as we all know, because of cost, because of land rights, because of environmental issues. And so that means that the ones we already have are very valuable. And I have for a long time, and of course here at the state board, that's all we work on are the existing dams. But even when I was with NRCS, I viewed those existing dams as much more important than trying to get a new dam built. Now, we may build a few more new dams here in Texas. There's a couple of sponsors that want to do that, and we'll help them do that as much as we can. But we need to keep in mind that these dams we have are very valuable, and we need to address anything that they need and keep them going. Thanks.
I agree completely, Steve. I know that Brian and I will, there'll be further information available on the Oklahoma program and the West Virginia program. But before we leave this panel, Brian, would you like to have any further comments?
Sure. Kevin, thanks for the quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It's one of my favorite quotes. As a matter of fact, that's on my computer in the office. So good quote. And the question that came up from that Ray read to us, the comment about even using consultants, the NRCS is still way understaffed to review. That goes directly to partnerships and involving locals. And so what I would say at the end is that NRCS doesn't have to do it all. NRCS shouldn't have to do it all and shouldn't think that it has to do it all. That's the reason why you have state dam regulatory offices. That's the reason why you have state conservation agencies that are dealing with watershed programs. We can deal with these issues. If you're understaffed and you can't get to it, perfect opportunity to tell us what, let us tell you what we need, guide us, don't direct us, and that'll relieve your frustration going forward about not being able to do the job that you think should be done, because we can step in and do that job as well. So that is, I think that question just kind of sums up about, it's not just all NRCS. And that's, I think, what we're all arguing here. It is not just all NRCS. We're in it too. And you are, and so the burden is being shifted to us. So let us share it, okay? And realize that, we are rational human beings as well. And our mission is, as Steve said, to protect these, because we know that the building programs of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s and early 2000s probably won't be resurrected in our lifetimes. So we got to maintain, and we got to do this. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Brian. And I would say, just to wrap it up, maybe, Ray, that one of the reasons this working group's together and is the leadership at NRCS, because we really see that they have a willingness to work with us, whether as a group or as individual state agency. And the National Watershed Coalition has provided us that opportunity. But Kevin and Jimmy and Terry at NRCS, they really have an open mind. They're willing to listen, and they're willing to act. And so I know that we come in a spirit of partnership and cooperation, because that's the hand that's been given to us from NRCS. So really look forward to working on these issues. And if there are other states or local sponsors that would like to be involved in this, we welcome you into our working group and to be a part of the conversation. Just appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Ray.
Trey, thank you. Thank you, Nick and Steve and all of our panelists. Brian, thank you so much. And Kevin, outstanding panel. You had some outstanding points. Now, that just got us a great kickoff, right, for the rest of our agenda for today.